Well, thank you all for coming on a really what has turned out to be a lovely afternoon. So I appreciate your willingness to sit indoors for a short time longer. I'm going to take you to different ancestral lands. I'm going to take you to the islands of Hawaii, and in particular the Big Island of Hawaii, to talk about what has really become one of the most remarkable incidents in the recent history of Kilauea Volcano, and I'll argue one of the most remarkable incidents in recent studies of volcanology. This is a volcano that I'll talk about the existing, or the eruption that that kind of led up to this part of the event. This is an eruption that went on for some of you, it was your entire lives. And for most of us who study volcanology, it was certainly our entire scientific lives. And this is about the end of that eruption, and for most of us, that was a really extraordinary event. We always thought we could go back to Kilauea and stick a rock hammer in lava, and that'll happen again, but it's not happening now. So I'm going to talk about that whole story. Sorry, I want to just recognize this is a project I've done with several others, in particular Yang Shen and Julie Morgan of University of Rhode Island and Rice University. Also some work by Xiao Zhuwei, who's a grad student at Rhode Island, and then Adam Sewell of Woods Hole Oceanographic. I want to point out none of this, as many of you know, nothing like this ever happens in a vacuum. So here's where we're going. This is the path I'm going to take you on. We're going to introduce you to Kilauea. I'm not expecting anyone knows much about that or its previous eruptions. I will talk about the fact, and actually it's a little bit out of order, I'll probably talk about that deployment a little bit later. But the seismic activity that we were interested in studying, and a lot about what I'm going to call the ocean entry. And you're looking here at a photo of what I mean by the ocean entry. This is where lava from the eruption pours into the ocean at the coast and makes the Big Island bigger. This is how Hawaiian Islands grow. My work is focused on things that are called hydrophones, hydroacoustic data. These are just sounds. I interpret what's going on at the volcano by the sounds that it makes. And in particular, the sounds I'm looking on are recorded underwater, so we call those hydroacoustic. And I'll talk about that relationship to the eruption. But I want to start with a view of the Hawaiian Islands that geologists love and maybe others have never seen. This is what the Hawaiian Islands would look like if you drained the oceans. And so really, this is the geology of it. These are islands that have been built up from the seafloor. And so the parts that are kind of in green and a little bit of brown, that's the part that's above sea level, but there's an enormous amount of interesting that is underneath the oceans that we cannot see. And just for a sense of scale, this little lump that you can sort of see right here, this is called Loihi Volcano. This is the volcano that will be either the next island in the Hawaiian chain or will simply merge with the Big Island and make it bigger. And just to get a sense for that, that's about the size of Mount Baker. So these are huge. These are enormous, enormous edifices. Second thing I want to call your attention to, and it's right up there where I can't reach, so bear with me. Up here, you see all this debris on the seafloor. All that stuff is half the island of Oahu. All that stuff is half the island of Molokai. And it turns out that at times in the history of these volcanoes, they may break in half, or enormous portions of them might slide off. A lot of the debris you see on the sides here are landslides. So one of the things that really interests us about these volcanoes is trying to understand how they form and how stable their flanks are. These do not happen often, for which we are grateful, but they'd be pretty amazing when they do, as long as nobody is anywhere close to a coast. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to zoom us in on the Big Island. The Big Island here is made up of 5 volcanoes. We are interested in Kilauea, and I'll come back to that in a bit. Well, actually, we'll come back to it right now. When we think about Kilauea, I'll outline for you where it is on land, but what I'm pointing out here is that actually the bulk of Kilauea is underwater. So all the stuff you see kind of stretching out there towards the blue, which is the deeper part, that's all part of Kilauea. So if we just look at that, kind of zoom in on that part, there are structures that I'm going to mention. So you can see the outline in the solid black. That's kind of the boundaries of what we think of as Kilauea Volcano. I'm going to be talking about places like Hale Ma'u Ma'u, which is the caldera at the summit. I'm going to talk about a little bit about Pu'u'o and the Puna district. This area here, all the part that's underwater, it's called the Kilauea South Flank. And this is an area that we know is slowly being moved to the south. It is slumping in this direction. And a lot of people have expressed concern that this may be where the next big slide is going to happen. So one of the reasons we study it is to say, well, is that the case? So in 1998, I was involved with a project where we went out and we did what's called a seismic, active source seismic survey, where we basically echo sounded into the subsurface to see the structure. And you're looking here at a cross section where that's the sea floor and this is, you're basically going underground along this line. And you can maybe see there are these sort of folded packages of debris. This is sediment that's sloughed off the big island and then got snow plowed up. If you can imagine taking a plow and pushing all this debris, and it kind of back rotated like that. So we took data that allowed us to make this picture and actually found it really reassuring. Because all this stuff is back rotated and folded, that tells us this whole bench, if anywhere, is sliding backward. And it's holding that whole flank in place. So this was really reassuring to us that we are not about to see a catastrophic landslide off the south flank. But nonetheless, we keep an eye on it for that reason. So keep that in mind. We're going to kind of move forward, and I'll show you a little more about where things stood in early 2018. So, quick question. Yes?
Bounded by the red?
Just that south flank area, the area that we know is mobile. We don't really know how much off here is mobile, just no data. So, but that's the area that we know is constantly building up and moving. Yeah, and do holler out questions if you got them. So, starting in 1983, an eruption began at Kilauea at what's called the Pu'u'o vent. Some of you may have been out to Kilauea during the time period of this eruption. That's where it continued to erupt up until 2018. So Pu'u'o was responsible for the production of an enormous amount of lava, the destruction of a couple of communities. And it looked kind of like this. This is sort of looking down into this sort of roiling lava, this little lava lake at the Pu'u. Pu'u means hill, so it's a little hill right there. So that was from 1982, kind of did a whole bunch of variable things. And in about 2008, a new eruption began, or a new part of the same eruption, up at the Summit of Kilauea. And Kilauea's summit has this thing that looks kind of like a big old thumbprint, and I'll kind of zoom in. Kind of looks like somebody stuck their thumb down, and the whole thing is sunken a little. We call that a caldera. Within Kilauea's caldera, there's another little pit called Halema'uma'u. And that is where the goddess Pele, who's the goddess of the volcano, makes her home. This is an area that was an active lava lake for over 100 years in the 1800s and late 1700s. In 2008, another pit opened up in Halema'uma'u. So you went to a pit and a pit and a pit, and you can see the small one there, and you might see that it too had a lava lake in it. So from 2008 on, we had two places actively erupting on Kilauea. So I'm going to walk you through what happened in 2018. So we start, it was kind of business as usual for the bulk of the spring. In late April, there were overflows of the lava lake in Halema'uma'u. That had happened before, but you can see, this is the bigger crater, and there's just stuff flowing all over the bottom. And again, not that surprising. But something somewhat unusual happened in a couple days later when the floor of Pu'u'o collapsed. Now, it was a really, really kind of, ugly day there, so you can't see much, so I'll try to show what it looked like. This is a previous collapse of the Pu'u. It's going to get kind of hazy for a bit. We'll go past that. It's time-lapse video. You can see lava flows pouring on it. But what happened later is this. And so this was a couple years earlier, but it happened again in late April, and that was all very exciting. But what happened after that was different. So we're back to a map of the Big Island. And this is a figure that was taken from some satellite data. This is done by Bridget Conter-Smith at the University of Hawaii. And when she looked at these data, what she did was to say, what part of the land has moved toward the satellite, up, and which part has moved away from the satellite. So we're looking down from space, and every place that's blue has sunk. And every place that's red has risen. So after this collapse of the Pu'u, which is right here, we see this inflation of the Puna district. And what that looked like on land, somewhere in that area, were cracks in the ground. And that was a curious thing to see. This was watched for several days. These cracks got bigger. Steam began coming out of the ground. And on May 3rd, an eruption began in the Leilani Estate subdivision. And so this is basically, you would walk, these are people's backyards, and there was lava pouring out. This is an area that had, many hundreds of homes. So again, this is May 3rd. So we now have taken lava from, well, we had lava at Pu'o'o, that's gone. Now we're erupting in Puna, and the next day, there's a 6.9 earthquake. That's larger than Nisqually, for those of you who felt that. Substantial, good deal larger than Nisqually. And what it does is, you can see on the arrows here, this is from work by Liu et al., it pushes the whole flank that way, which is always interesting to us. Now we know these have happened before, earthquakes in this area, but it was kind of curious to see that this went on. So this big earthquake occurs, and I'll show you where those earthquakes were with respect to the south flank. So here we are back to that south flank, and this is the 6.9, and these are all the earthquakes that took place in the week afterwards. And what we see is that there's earthquakes that are all along that red boundary that Dennis pointed out, which kind of made us a little worried, just because we hadn't really seen earthquakes out there on that bench that we know is holding the flank in place. So we thought, well, that might be something we want to study. So we'll just keep that in mind. And I'll walk you through the rest of the eruption, and then we'll come back to this. So this is going on. Several days later, even more weirdness occurs, and there's explosive activity at the Kilauea summit. First time there's been explosive activity since 1924. All right. There's now a ton of lava pouring out in the Puna district. And there are many, many fissures that are opening up and opening up and opening up. And you can see where all the streets are, and here's where the lava is. And we're up at this point, when this figure was made, we're up to 23 different vents that have opened and poured lava out, and most have closed again. And it's pouring into the ocean. And finally, it all kind of collected at fissure number 8. And that remained the locus of activity for the remainder of the eruption. From there, lava flowed from fissure number 8 about 8 miles all the way through the subdivisions, right past this photo right here. This is the lava flow. This is the Puna geothermal venture. This is a geothermal power plant. You can understand why you would tap this area for geothermal energy. At this point, however, things became a little hazardous, and they shut the plant down. But just for scale, that plant is probably about a half a kilometer across, so quarter mile or so. So that's a very large lava flow, and it's extending 8 miles to the sea. As it extended there, it went through the communities of Kapoho and Vacation Land, and in the end, over 700 homes were lost to this eruption. So it really, and this whole bay is gone. That bay is now filled in with activity that looks like this. As the lava flowed into the ocean, it developed these solid lava flows. It fragmented. We'll talk a lot about that. And where we stand now is a map that looks like this. And it's hard to see from where you are, but I'll try to point out there's a dashed line all along here. That's the old coast. We've added about 900 new acres of land to the big island. It is the bigger island now. And that's the part that interests me. Because first of all, we went out and mapped it. We mapped what the new bathymetry is like. So bathymetry is topography underwater. And when we did that, we compared it to previous bathymetry. And what you're looking at, there's that same coastline, there's the dash. And everywhere you see colors, we've measured how much new material there is. And we are, easily over a kilometer offshore here, and we've got still 200 meters of material that's been emplaced. And overall, it looks like at least 60, maybe as much as 65 or 70% of all the lava that erupted here went offshore. This is an offshore eruption. We focus on the land stuff, but really the activity happened off there. Further, this photo that was taken again, that's about a kilometer offshore, that's a lava flow. Lava just headed on into the ocean. So everybody who says, can't we just spray these things with a hose? Well, the ocean didn't stop it, right? So this was a really pretty impressive event. So this inspired in us a bunch of questions. Right? We wanted to know what effect that 6.9 had on the south flank, whether there's any increased hazard from landsliding. We don't even really know on what fault it occurred. Those are details I'm not going to get into. My colleagues Yangshen and Jia Wei are working on that problem. My real interest is how the lava-water interactions contribute to the growth of the coast and the stability of the flank. So with all these questions in mind, my colleagues and I wrote to the National Science Foundation and said, we've got one chance at this. We've got one opportunity. Let us go out there. And they funded us via what's called a rapid response grant to go put seismometers on the seafloor offshore. Our goals were to constrain the locations, to locate where these earthquakes occurred offshore, to record the aftershocks of that 6.9, to understand its failure, and to characterize the sounds and the shaking from those lava-water interactions. We did this aboard the research vessel Kilauea, which is a University of Hawaii ship. This is me with two of my students who I brought to sea with me. Kevin Lally on the left was my graduate student at the time. Lena Gibbs was an undergraduate, both in the geophysics major, both here from Western. The KOK, this vessel is, this was its penultimate trip. It was mothballed soon thereafter. We know why. All I can tell you is if it wasn't necessary for that ship to float, it hadn't been fixed in years. So we got to enjoy some adventures. It was not just us. Each of the PIs on the project brought students with them, and we also reached out to the University of Hawaii and said, who wants to come to sea? We got space. And so we had a graduate student and two undergrads from the University of Hawaii who joined us. We also had an engineer from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography who was in charge of the instruments. And I will tell you, Yang and Julie and I sat back and watched. They were the heroes of this trip. So Martin taught the students all about how to construct these instruments. So these are the ocean bottom seismometers. So the students put these whole things together, prepared everything for launch. Once they're all built, actually this is the inside of it. I want to point out the two instruments that these carry. We're looking down on the guts of this. This is a seismometer, measures shaking of the ground, and a hydrophone measures shaking of the water, which is sound. So both of those are co-located in this instrument. This is what it looks like as we're launching it. That metal plate is a weight that carries it to the bottom of the sea. And the flag and the other little things on top are there to tell us where it is when it returns, and we can find it again. The yellow is all flotation. And so this is what the launching looks like. So we put the instrument, basically just leaned it overboard. Oh my goodness, you might need, that's like making you more seasick than the actual cruise. But you'll see they're just gonna disconnect it, and it drops to the seafloor, and then we do a little work to measure where it was. We come back 2 months later, and we call to it. We send it a little acoustic signal, and we say, drop your weights, and it drops that weight and is now positively buoyant and floats to the top where we pick it up. So yikes, let's move on, shall we? That was brutal. All right, so here's the network we put out there. So these are where the earthquakes were that we were chasing, and all the triangles are where we put instruments. There are two sad red triangles. This one just didn't record. We don't know why, it just didn't record. And that poor sucker never came back. And it is a little close to the ocean entry, and there is a non-zero possibility that it is now part of the Big Island. But I cannot say why. All I can say is that it did not come back to us. But the other ones did. With the star up there, that is where lava was actively flowing into the ocean. So these were the signals that we can record. Now I want to point out that we put the instruments where they are here because we're trying to surround the earthquakes we expected to get. These were the earthquakes in May, and it took us about 6 weeks to get instruments and get a boat. So by the time we got out there, the seismic activity was a little different, and these were the earthquakes, if this will change, that we got. So happily, things offshore had tapered a bit from the stability of the flank perspective. There's a lot more on land. We'll come back to that. These were just the earthquakes that were located with the instruments on land. This was the Hawaiian Volcano Observatories perspective. Jiajiwei is working on this right now, and I apologize, the quality of this figure is a little poor, but these are the earthquakes that he has detected, and you can see there's way more offshore. If we go back to what we thought was there, the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory only saw maybe 50 offshore, and Wei sees quite a few hundreds. So we know that our having instruments out there is going to give us a much better picture of what was happening. We just work in progress. Now again, my big interest is this, is where the lava flows in at the coast. So again, this is the thing that grows the big island. This is the process really by which all of these islands have formed over time. And this is, I'm showing you a photo, I took this photo on a helicopter overflight the day after our cruise. And so a couple things you can see here. First, that lush green Hawaii that you saw in previous things is buried. This is all under lava right now. The lava itself, you can see it steaming, but it's actually a fairly passive process. It's just flowing into the ocean. And because it's a passive process, there's a tour boat that feels pretty confident going close to the coast right there. So this is a tour boat that went out there every day. For scale, that's about 40 feet long. So it gives you some sense of what we've got. Now this again is July 14. So the next morning, my student Kevin went on that tour boat to go see what it looked like from that view. And this was Kevin's view, and once again I apologize for the shakiness, but this is the exact same area. Oh, I'm really sorry this is shaky, but you can get an idea. It was really different. Something was very, very significantly different on this day. Some of you might hear him go, whoa, and all that. Highly explosive, substantially more interaction with the water. So I'm going to show a bunch of figures that look like this. So let me explain this for a second. These are things called spectrograms. And this is a way of looking at seismic data in a way that tells us sort of a lot more than just the wiggles. So on the top, there are two different stations here. This is a station very close to the ocean entry, and this is a station much, much farther away. Each one shows what we call a seismogram on the top. That's showing basically how the water shook. It's basically, was it pressured or pulled away, right? Compression, rarefaction. And we can see there's a pretty strong signal at that part there because we see the bigger amplitude. It was like whomp, whomp in the water, like that. The bottom panel shows another perspective on things. So earthquakes, or in this case, this again is acoustic, this is sound. Earthquakes do the same thing in that they have different frequencies. There are high notes and there are low notes. So I think of this as the earth playing us a symphony. And this figure shows all of these. The vertical axis here is telling us low notes on the bottom, high notes at the top, and then the colors are which are louder. So here we see there's a lot of very, very strong, the warmer colors, pinks and reds, are loud. Strong, very low frequency, right? We've got the timpani going here and giving us this baseline for the whole thing. And then occasionally we've got things that are much higher frequency, and that sounds like a crack, like that. This very strong thing here is very low frequency. That's an earthquake. When we get closer to the ocean entry, though, first of all, it's a lot noisier. There's a lot more high frequency stuff that's a lot more powerful. And that's just crack, 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 crackling all that. And that we think is the sound of lava interacting with water. And we can tell that in part because it's very loud. Again, all those warmer colors are because there's tons of noise right there near the coast. But we also know this. This is a figure. So we took this from sea. On July 11 at noon, this is what the coast looked like. And you can see some steam on the right side. And you can see some actual smoke here. And I really mean smoke here. So volcanologists get all fussy when people say smoke because people often think ash is smoke. Ash is rock. This is a burning building. This is actually the destruction of a school that was in this area. 2 hours later, there's a new area where steam is coming because the lava flow that destroyed that school has now made it to the water. What we see on the instruments at that time is a dramatic increase in the amount of noise right when that thing hits the water. And this is the station closest to it. These are all much farther away. So we can see when the lava hits water, this is what it sounds like. So we can use this now as a little bit of a proxy for when is lava flowing in and is it flowing in violently. This is just a little passing thing that excites me, maybe nobody else cares. One of the things, we're looking here again, these same kinds of signals. And what you might notice if you look carefully here are these kind of horizontal bands. And you can also sort of see them here. Quiet note, loud note, quiet note, loud note, right? Like this. And that sounds like a chord. That's a harmonic. So you're hearing octaves being played. Sometimes when we hear that, that is actually the volcano being resonant. In this case, it's not. In this case, this is what it's an interference pattern. We have sound going directly to our sensor, and we have sound bouncing off the surface of the ocean and then hitting the sensor. And depending on how the source receiver geometry, sometimes those frequencies add up constructively and get loud. If that path, though, is a little bit longer, or if the frequency is basically half a wavelength off, they cancel. And we can use that pattern to see how far away the source was. We can find out that source receiver geometry. And what's cool about that is most of the time, in a lot of these signals, we don't see it. We didn't see it at all in the last figure. But now we see it, which tells us it's happening somewhere different. And we can model which frequencies would be loud and which would be quiet, so we can see where those sources are coming from. Also a work in progress. I've done this on another volcano, haven't yet done it for Kilauea, but that is our hope, is that we'll be able to tell where that lava is flowing in the part of the ocean that we cannot see. That's something that's moderately easy to model. Sometimes these things get really loud. So now we're looking at the full network. These are the two stations closest, and you can see that this is super loud, both in very low frequencies that you can barely see where you are, and then some that are cracking across the whole spectrum. And even our distant stations, some of them are picking them up. Some don't. Those little low frequency pulses you see on all of them, those are earthquakes going on in the background all the time. This particular one, we know what this is. This was recorded the day after Kevin got off the boat. You saw the day I took a photo when it was quiescent. You saw Kevin's video from when he was on the tour boat. The next day, that tour boat was out there when this happened, and that's what happened to the tour boat. So there was a highly explosive event that smashed the roof of the boat and injured 23 people. One was a Western alum. We're trying to work a deal where she's going to bring me her photos and I'm going to let her see her rocks under the microscope. That's our goal. We've been having trouble connecting, but we're going to do this. So it would be really nice to know when this thing is acting explosively. So this one happened at about 5:30 in the morning Hawaii time. 2 hours later, we saw that monstrosity. And that was huge. This is an enormous signal. Now, I am not sure if the next photo I'm going to show you is this big sucker or if it's just this one here, because I don't have a good time stamp on this. But there was a boat out there at the time, and he took this photo. That is an enormous explosion. We don't see very much of this. And in fact, that was the largest explosion we recorded during our time. But potentially, it can tell us, again, what do lava water explosions sound like? And we can listen for them and start to recognize better when there's no one there what happened. So one of the big questions that I have is basically, why is it explosive sometimes? And why is it not explosive sometimes? Why are there times we see tons of noise and times that we don't? So this is actually an issue that's been studied for a long time, and I'm going to take you back to 1997 in a paper by Maddox and Mengen, where we're looking at kind of, again, a cross-section into the ground. And they said, you know, there are times, we have lava flowing into the sea all the time. This was back in the Pu'u'o days. But occasionally, we get these landslides, and there's a very large flux of water, of lava into the water. And when there's a lot of lava, it gets more turbulent, it mixes more water in, and it explodes. Alternatively, you can just kind of fracture that thing and pour water in the top. So what their hypothesis was that more lava equals more explosive. at kind of a core level. So my thought is that, okay, if more lava is more explosive, I think I have data that show how explosive it was over the whole time we were there, because I think we can hear when it's more explosive. So I'm just going to show kind of a first cut of if it's loud, if it's explosive, if it's quiet, it's not. And we look at our over like a couple of months, and you can see times where the noise is loud. This is basically loudness, not loud, right? Times when it's really loud, times when it's quiet, times when it's loud, times when it's quiet. We see these oscillations that I suspect are associated with when is it explosive, when is it not. And I'll bet you can see where the eruption ended. And then there was no noise after that. So I went to present this at a conference in San Francisco in December, and this was kind of one of my summary slides, and I was all excited to show this. And I'm flying down, and I open my email, and there's an alert of a new paper that's come up that relates the strength of seismic shaking to the amount of lava coming out. Well, I was like, well, let's take a look at that. So I looked at that paper, and they did kind of the same thing. They looked at the strength. They were looking at seismometers on the ground, how much the ground shook. I'm listening to how much is shaking in the water. And this is not something you have to worry too much about. But what we basically see is there are times when there's a lot, this is the seismic stuff, a lot of shaking, and then a lot of lava coming out. As the ground is shaking more, you can see the level of lava rise in the tube and then back off again. So I added their seismic data in to mine, and then for good measure, I added one of my hydrophones that was far away from the ocean entry. And so what we've got, here are my hydrophones that are close to the lava. This is the one that's far away from the lava, and it doesn't see those surges at all. So it's another good confirmation that what we're looking at is lots of noise when there's lots of lava. And then you see the seismic pulse. It's in a terrible color for this background. My apologies. I was mostly trying to avoid the red-green issue for people who cannot distinguish. But what we can kind of see is where they have peaks. A little bit later, we often have peaks. Now it's kind of arm-wavy. This is, I'll fully concede. But there's a big peak in how much the ground shook, which we know is correlated with how much lava flows. And a few hours later, I see a surge in noise. These two are a little harder to tell. There's a little bit of an increase, but it's vague. This one, increase, a little vague. Nice pulse. 6 hours later, I get a surge in lava, or I get a surge in noise. They get a big one, I get a surge in noise. So every time the ground, so it shakes on land, give it a little while, and it shakes in the water. And I think what we're seeing here is the amount of time it takes the lava to get to the coast. And actually, we can use this as a bit of a proxy for how rapidly that process could move, if this is correct. So I want to kind of tie this stuff together a little bit. So the lava is coming out of fissure 8 right here. And it is flowing 8 miles around here. And this is where it's pouring in at the time that I'm paying attention to it. So that process takes hours. It's also kind of an open system, so it's not clear that all the lava that comes out of fissure 8 is going to wind up there. Some of it gets diverted, some flows to the side. So it's not a clear, more lava comes out, more lava hits the ocean. There's some transitions that can also happen in the middle. But we do know that this connection is there. So there's an important issue, though, that comes with this, of why we have these surges, why there are times when the ground shakes more, and why more lava comes out. So we have to think now about where the lava comes from. And so this was work that was done by Anderson and others, actually came out on the same day that other paper did, about how these things are connected. And this is actually fairly well known from people watching at the time. What we think is if you were to look underground here, here's the summit. This is where all the magma hangs out most of the time. And it gets squeezed underground. It used to go up to Pu'o'o. Now it heads out to the rift. We also saw something pretty extraordinary going on during this eruption that links that process to what we saw. What you're looking at here are the number of earthquakes occurring recorded every hour over the course of the eruption. So you can see, and this is actually probably earthquakes over about magnitude 2, maybe some over magnitude 1. There were so many earthquakes happening that this is a really small subset of how many actually went on. They just could not keep up with processing them. But what you see is that there are a lot of earthquakes and then it tapers. There are a lot of earthquakes and then it tapers. And that cycle went on. It's a little familiar with what we were just looking at. Furthermore, all those yellows, those are earthquakes that were magnitude 5 and above. And if we look carefully at the timing of this, what you see is this. Lots and lots and lots of earthquakes, boom, magnitude 5, quiet. Builds up again, lots and lots and lots of earthquakes, boom, magnitude 5, quiet. And this happened 63 times. 63 magnitude 5s hit the summit of Kilauea. Let me show you what was going on. I sure hope this sucker goes. Okay, so this is a time-lapse video of Halemaumau crater. There was the explosive stuff, and I want you to watch the edges. So what we have is lava pouring out in surges at the coast and the summit collapsing. And it turns out that every time there was a collapse, there was a pushing of lava all the way down to fissure 8. And after that, there was a flow out to the coast. So we had a plunger, and we had it. There's an immediate connection there. It's like turning on a hose. You turn it on, and the faucet immediately comes out the side because it's full of water. So same thing here. It's full of magma. So that's what Halemaumau used to look like, and this is what it looks like now. The Jagger Museum that was up there is closed. The Hawaiian Volcano Observatory has had to move to Hilo. That area is no longer, a lot of that area is not occupiable anymore because everything was damaged. So I'm going to show in summary all the processes that went on together. And so this is an animation that was put together by Nathan Becker at the Tsunami Warning Centers. What you're going to see are earthquakes that kind of pop off, and yeah, you see this is like background earthquakes happening all the time. We're in early April. So the earthquakes occur and then fade away just so they're not blocking your view. We get little swarms like that from time to time. This is background seismic activity. So the lava lake is going to overflow in late April, and then we're going to have the collapse of Pu'o'o. And then you're going to see the seismicity propagate down the rift right here. We're going to get a 5.4 and a 6.9. Right. And you can see that whole flank lighting up. Now you're going to see the lava flows start to pour out at the coast. A lot of seismicity associated with this at first because we're cracking new paths for those fissures to open up. But after a while, once those fissures are open and everything concentrates at fissure 8, everything's hot. Lava doesn't have to break the ground anymore, and we no longer have a lot of earthquakes out in the Puna area. What we do have, you can see now, they're called, it's written here as explosions. Nathan made this a little while ago, and I haven't replaced it with a better one. We didn't know what those collapse events were for a long time. People were calling them explosions. Now we know they were collapses. Every day, there's a magnitude 5 at the summit, and they keep going and going and going. So we're in June now. Again, the lava flows, you can see it pouring out there, building the big island. You can see where it's covering that new Kapoho Bay and building out that new part of the coast. We're into July. We still have, again, kind of a sticky connection to the video, but you can see these things that are occurring still at the event. But we've only got probably 6 or 7 more, and then we're going to just watch at the summit as we come toward the end. We were watching these every day saying, there should be a 5 occurring anytime. There should be a 5 occurring anytime. And one day I said to my husband, there should be a 5 occurring anytime, and we watched, and we watched, and we watched. And it stopped. And that's what it all looked like. That was the whole sequence. And since that time, those are just the eruption, the final features that were there. So since that time, there has been no lava on the surface of Kilauea Volcano for the first time in a very, very long time. It has been totally quiescent. I have hypotheses about when it'll start up again, but I'm not sure how popular they are. I think it'll be probably a decade, and that's just based on, we had a very, very similar event happen in 1996. But on that volcano that was underwater, the one that I said was the size of Mount Baker, it did this exact same thing, but nobody saw it because it was underwater. And we recorded it, but since then, Loihi has done almost nothing since then. It's been a couple decades. Now, Loihi is not as active as Kilauea, but I think that kind of summit collapse really disrupts a magmatic system, and I suspect Kilauea is going to be quiet for a while. So, you know, where we are now with this, if I can get to this, so this was an unprecedented event. It was unprecedented in terms of the amount of lava that flowed out, the number of structures destroyed and people displaced, again, 700 structures destroyed. The summit deformation, that collapse of Halemaumau, none of us can even now can believe it. It was such an enormous event in the life of this volcano. I'll talk about that in one second again. It's the end of 35 years of continuous eruptive activity. We've seen these really interesting explosions that we think we can use now as a window into these long-term processes, even when nobody was there to look at it. A kind of side note, when the Pu'u'o eruption was going on, pouring lava into the water, it was constantly building a bench and collapsing, building and collapsing, and there were landslides every day underwater. Little ones. We saw none at this one. So there's something very different about how the lava poured in. That is another direction that our research will go. And we think that potentially there's this connection between these, we know there's a connection between the collapses and the lava coming out. I think we can also tie that to how much lava flowed in and try to get a sense for when is it explosive, what does it take to make these things happen quietly or explosively. The last thing I want to say, I said that you know, things were really different at the summit. The other thing that's happened since this time is that that crater is now so deep in Kilauea at the summit that it's now below the groundwater. And water has been flowing in to Halemaumau. If a little bit of water flows in and magma rises again, it'll vaporize the water and that won't be a problem. If a lot of water flows in, if we have a real water lake at the summit, and magma comes back, then we have the potential for highly explosive activity at Kilauea. And we know that at other times in Kilauea's history, most recently the year 1790, it has had very explosive eruptions. But no one has understood really how that happens. And we may be seeing that for the first time, but time will tell. So that's where we are. I would be very happy to take questions about any of this stuff. So, thank you. Anything. Dennis, yes?
The lava that erupts on land and
Yeah.
then moves down to the ocean, it must get much cooler. Now, versus the lava that actually emerges directly into the ocean.
Right, right. Okay, so this is a question about how that changes its behavior?
Yes.
Okay, so Dennis's question is, when the lava flows out for a while, it's going to cool down. So versus if it's coming right in there, so could the temperature also impact that? So when lava flows, it's an excellent question. So a lot of it just has to do with how insulated it is as it flows. And a lot of what we see on Kilauea, when we get out to the coast, we actually largely did not see big lava flows on the coast. It would insulate itself. It would freeze on the top and come out through tubes. So if we go back here to, it's a figure that I'll show that kind of makes that case. Okay. So you might be able to see in this figure that, sorry, that's another ocean entry from years past. So you can see this is pouring out of the ground. So it's actually been pretty well insulated. And so we've seen this on Pu'u'o for a long time. Lava would flow out from underground, and you would take a sample, or take a temperature sample, and it's still 1100 degrees. So if it's liquid, it's got to be over 1000 degrees if it's basalt. So we know that. And it does, we don't think it gets, if it gets much cooler, it freezes and it doesn't make it. So probably not a huge difference, but I could be wrong about that. Other questions? Anything? Yes?
The cross section that you had from the initial summit and then the one now, do you have like a measurement of the volume difference there?
I don't, others do. That was in that paper. And the volume, so Zach's asking about this. I don't have that number in front of me. There is a volume estimate, and it correlates pretty nicely with how much lava came out. Not perfectly, but there's also a lot of landsliding and things like that that slough off and all that. But yes, they correlates pretty well.
Do you know where the water table is of this?
I can, it's very low right now. The water, I don't know where the water table exactly is, but I know that water now is percolating in, and we've got a few, I don't know if we know exactly how deep it is. I would guess it's a couple 5 meters deep. So still pretty low, highly acidic. It's pretty cool. They have to fly a drone over and take a sample of it. So they've been experimenting. And in fact, another Western grad, who Angie Diefenbach, who did her master's with us here, is now the primary person making all the drone science happen at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. In fact, not only was she responsible for showing how you could get estimates of lava flux and you could measure all this stuff that you couldn't get out there to see, but at one point at night, there was a man whose house was largely surrounded by lava, and he didn't know where to go to get out, and they had a thermal camera showing where he was, and Angie flew the drone over, and they directed him to follow the drone, and she got him to safety and saved his life. Yes?
Do you mind if I take a picture of the slide?
Oh no, go ahead, totally. And all of this stuff, all these really cool photos, most of the things like this are available on the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory's website. It's a USGS website, and you know, some of those photos are mine. I'm going to share them with the library, but also HVO has amazing photos on their website. So, anything else I can answer for you?
My wife and I were there in April.
So-
April 30th.
So, this is, so you just, yeah. And it took a while for it to collapse, so you'd have to be there for a bit.
Yeah.
But if I can make this, again, I can never tell with their videos. They have really long intros, so I'm never sure if I've hit play properly or not. Let me just, I'll just show you, if I can make this work. Jeez, this is one other video, and again, come on, there we go. I know our videos are terrible, and if it's making you seasick, just close your eyes. But we'll see if we can get this to go. So if this video will work, they fly over. You can see good views of the water pond in theory are there. They give us a lot of time to read. There we go. So this is Kilauea Iki. This is another little crater off to the side of the caldera. This is the main caldera. This place called the Desolation Trail. People might have hiked if you've been there. Here is the new Hale Ma'u. Seismic station fell in there somewhere. So all of this is a new collapse. This is certainly far deeper. And when they come around the side, you're going to briefly see, I think, let me see if we can get to it, a portion of the road that is now in the crater. Yeah, here's the road.
Yeah, you can't drive around anymore.
Nope, can't drive around. They actually haven't let you go into the caldera for a long time. You can see the pond here. Okay, so it's a little deeper now, but not much. Yeah.
My husband and I went last March, a year ago.
Uh-huh.
We actually got to drive into Leilani Estates and walk on Fissure 8
Mhm.
and it was amazing how there were houses on one side of the street, and the other side of the street, the houses were all burned down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the street just ended
Yep.
at the lava flow across the end of the street.
One of the things that you saw, which was fascinating, is you would see the lava flow, and if you look down from the top, it would be perfectly lush on one side and all dead on this side, because the fumes would go in the direction of the trade winds. Trade winds would blow the fumes from the lava, which produces acidity in the water in the air, and that acid killed off all the plants that didn't burn.
When we were there, one of the things that the ranger said to us, we were at the overlook looking at the
Mhm.
summit. At that time, the lava was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, oh, you came here at the perfect time because it didn't used to be this. You couldn't see the lava.
That's right.
And we said, why? They said, well, it's plugged up down somewhere and it's raising
Yeah.
up. I said, oh. And what's going to happen next? And it's like, well, we don't really know. The plug might just melt and it'll all
Yeah.
fall out, or go somewhere else.
Right.
And I was curious your reaction to that.
I think that's exactly right. That's, I mean, that was always, it's kind of always the case. I mean, you know, volcanoes do things that are predictable until they don't. And, you know, they do tend to be creatures of habit. So we do tend to know, well, we've seen this happen before. But largely we say, oh, we've seen this happen before. When that thing changes, well, then we know. So that pressure that we saw build that caused the lava lake to overflow like that, we had seen that before. And it had just gone back to its previous actions. This time it was different. Why? Pele knows. That could be about it. So,
There's been
Yeah.
a series of volcanic eruptions here, and I've seen this has been studied. What about the chemistry of the actual lava
Yeah.
at different times?
Yeah.
Does that change, or is that really similar?
it changes over various time scales. So for example, you know, the Hawaiian Islands form because there's something called a hotspot, right? There's this source of magma in Earth's mantle that is melting constantly. And the plate is moving over it and makes a volcano, and then that volcano moves away and you get another volcano, and that's why you have a chain. As the volcano moves over the plume, the chemistry changes, whether it's on the outsides where there's only a little bit of melt, or over the middle where it's hot and there's a lot of melt. So that's a big scale change. There are other changes that as it goes over there, it taps different portions of that plume. So we actually see some source differences. Then there are differences because maybe on its way up it intersected, you know, another portion of an older flow, or interacted more with, well, most of that is pretty subtle stuff. This eruption was even weirder because the first lava that came out, that first stuff that came out in the Leilani Estates, was a type of lava that we've never seen in Hawaii. And it's something called an andesite. And an andesite is what happens when a basalt sits around for a really long time and undergoes a process called crystal fractionation. And lava in Hawaii comes out when it rises up. And actually from the little subtle chemical signatures of that, they discovered that that was a lava flow that had actually, other aspects of that magma had erupted, I think in 1940s or 1960s, I can't remember, and the rest had just stayed there in the rift, fractionated, turned into something different, and then got pushed out. So we can see that. There are lots and lots of studies of individual lava flows and being able to see distinctions between those. Not the work that I do, but I know a lot of that work has been done in the Summit caldera area to tell its history. Largely to tell if there's one big magma reservoir, in which case it would all be mixed and it would all look the same, or if there are little pockets, in which case it all look different. And it seems to be more like that.
The hotspot thing is very interesting. I think Yellowstone is the same thing. We throw out Yellowstone, and maybe okay. So
Maybe.
there's some volcanoes that are old volcanoes that you can see as you drive out.
Yeah.
At Galapagos, I think, similar.
Yeah.
So what I wonder about that is why do you get islands? Why do
Right.
you have one giant,
One big chain.
long mesa volcano?
Right. There's one place in the world where maybe what we have is one giant mesa volcano. It's on the seafloor also. But no, you're right. You get this, and then that moves, and you get a second one. So why doesn't it erupt continuously? And probably because when you build a volcano, they're huge. You saw that, right? They're monsters. And they actually flex the tectonic plate underneath them. And what that does is it makes some areas, it puts them in compression, where the very plate is being squeezed, and lava can't go through there. Whereas at the base of it, it's stretched, and that's really conducive to lava pouring up. And so it keeps feeding in the bottom, but it doesn't feed in right next to it because it's squeezing. But at some point, as that gets farther away, it's like, I'm just going over here, and it starts a separate one over here. So we think there's sort of it's flexurally controlled, probably. So,
Is the plate moving at a steady rate to the northwest?
probably. The plate, you know, there's only two ways that we know the speeds of plates. One is we have to look at how old things are, and then we're averaging over millions of years. So we can't really tell. Now we can use GPS, and that's a really short time history. So there are some places where we can see that, not in Hawaii, but for example, in the Tonga Arc, what we see over the millions of years is way slower than what we see right now. So there's been an acceleration, but we can't quite constrain when. So, yes,
I wanted to
totally.
remind everyone that this presentation has been recorded.
Okay.
As you mentioned earlier, it's going to be housed in the institutional repository that we have here at Western called CEDAR. If you'd like more information about how to access that, please see me. I'm happy to give information. Let's thank
Yeah,
Dr.
thank you all for being here. Thank you much. So.